Oh my God.
What you're about to witness isn't just another animal rescue story. This is about a newborn foal that should have been celebrating its first sunrise, taking wobbly steps beside its mother, feeling the warmth of a new day. Instead, this innocent creature lay motionless in the dirt while a crowd gathered, pointing, whispering, recording on their phones. Some walked away. Others shook their heads in pity. But one woman refused to accept what everyone else had already decided was inevitable. What she uncovered in the next few hours didn't just save a life. It exposed a truth so disturbing that it would shake an entire community and force authorities to ask questions no one wanted to answer. This is the story of a silent foal, a relentless veterinarian, and the dark secret hidden in plain sight at Meadowbrook Ranch. The foal wouldn't stand. That was all anyone knew when the sun broke over Meadowbrook Ranch at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning in late April. Workers arriving for the early shift found the newborn sprawled in the birthing stall, its legs folded beneath its body like broken branches, its chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate rhythms. The mare stood over her baby, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with an animal panic that needed no translation. She nudged the foal's neck. She nickered low and urgent. Nothing. The baby didn't even lift its head. By 6:30, a crowd had formed outside the stall. Ranch hands leaned against the wooden rails, coffee cups steaming in their hands, faces blank with the kind of resignation that comes from seeing nature's cruelties too many times. A few pulled out their phones. Some took pictures. One man filmed a video, narrating in a low voice about the realities of horse breeding, about how not every birth ends in a fairy tale. His tone was educational, almost clinical, as if documenting a case study rather than witnessing suffering. The ranch manager, a thick-necked man named Clayton Howell, arrived at 6:45. He wore his usual uniform, faded jeans, scuffed boots, a hat pulled low over sunburned skin. He didn't rush. He walked with the slow, heavy gait of someone who had already made his decision before seeing the problem. He stopped at the gate, looked down at the foal for exactly 7 seconds, then turned to his foreman. "Call it," Clayton said. His voice carried no emotion. "Not worth the vet bill. Nature decides these things, not us." The foreman, a younger man with guilt written across his face, hesitated. "Don't you want to at least check if—" "I said call it." Clayton's tone left no room for argument. "Get the mare separated and cleaned up. We've got buyers coming Thursday." "I don't need them seeing this." The words hung in the cool morning air. A few workers shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. No one argued. This was Clayton's ranch, Clayton's rules, and everyone who worked there knew that questioning him meant risking their paycheck. In a small town where jobs were scarce and reputations mattered, silence was survival. Inside the stall, the foal's breathing grew more labored. Its rib cage heaved with effort. A thin line of foam had formed at the corner of its mouth. The coat, which should have been soft and clean in those first hours of life, was matted with dirt and birth fluid that had dried into stiff patches. One of the foal's eyes was half open, staring at nothing, reflecting the pale morning light like a broken mirror. The mare pressed her muzzle against her baby's side. She made a sound, a low, guttural cry that was somehow worse than a scream. It was the sound of a mother who understood that her child was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Several workers turned away. One woman covered her mouth, but no one moved to help. That's when the truck pulled up. A white Ford pickup, dusty and dented, came to a stop just outside the main barn. The engine cut off. The door opened. A woman stepped out, and everything about her presence seemed wrong for this place, this moment. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a veterinary clinic shirt with the sleeves rolled up and mud stains on the knees of her jeans. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chun, and she wasn't supposed to be there. She had been driving past on her way to another call when she noticed the unusual number of vehicles parked outside Meadowbrook Ranch. Curiosity wasn't her reason for stopping. It was the sight of the crowd gathered around one stall, the way they stood so still like mourners at a funeral that hadn't officially started yet. Something in her gut told her to pull over. She had learned to trust that instinct. Sarah walked toward the group with quick, purposeful steps. She didn't ask permission. She didn't introduce herself. She went straight to the stall, and when she saw the foal, her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm in less than a second. "How long has it been down?" she asked, her voice sharp and clear. Clayton turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm a vet. How long?" "We found it like this about 40 minutes ago," the foreman answered before Clayton could speak. "It hasn't moved since." Sarah was already climbing over the gate. "Did anyone check for trauma, infections, blocked airway?" Clayton stepped forward, his voice rising. "I didn't call for a vet. This isn't your concern."
Sarah ignored him. She was kneeling beside the foal now, her hands moving over its small body with trained precision. She checked the gums, the eyes, the temperature. She listened to the heartbeat through a stethoscope she pulled from her truck bag. The foal's pulse was erratic, too fast, too weak. The body temperature was dropping. But there was something else, something that made Sarah's jaw tighten. She stood up and turned to face Clayton. This foal didn't just refuse to stand. Something's wrong. Something specific. It's weak. It happens. Clayton's voice was dismissive, but there was an edge to it now, a defensiveness that made the workers around him exchange glances. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "When was the mare last checked during pregnancy?" "That's none of your business." "When was she last seen by a vet?" Clayton didn't answer. The silence stretched too long, confirmed too much. Sarah looked down at the foal again, at the way its legs were positioned, at the slight tremor running through its underdeveloped muscles, at the color of its tongue. Then she looked at the mare's swollen joints, at the dullness in her coat, at the telltale signs of malnutrition that everyone else had been too blind or too complicit to see. "You didn't have her on proper supplements, did you?" Sarah's voice was quiet now, but it cut through the morning air like a blade. "No selenium, no vitamin E. This foal has white muscle disease." A few workers gasped. One whispered to another, asking what that meant. Clayton's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Sarah pulled out her phone. "And I'm calling animal control. This foal is dying because of negligence. And if you think I'm going to stand here and let that happen without documentation, you don't know who you're dealing with." The crowd shifted. Phones that had been filming the foal were now pointed at Clayton. The story was changing. This wasn't nature's cruelty anymore. This was something else entirely. Clayton took 3 steps towards Sarah, his boots heavy on the dirt. "You need to leave. Right now." Sarah didn't move. She kept her phone raised, camera pointed directly at him, recording. "I'm not going anywhere until this foal gets treatment. This is private property, and that's a dying animal. I don't need your permission to document neglect." The word neglect hit the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Ripples of whispered conversation spread through the workers. A few backed away from the stall, as if distance could separate them from whatever was unfolding. Others leaned in closer, their phones now openly recording. In the age of social media, everyone knew what happened to people caught on camera doing the wrong thing. The power had shifted, and Clayton felt it. His face reddened. "You don't have any authority here. Actually, under state animal welfare laws, any licensed veterinarian who witnesses an animal in distress has the legal right to intervene and report." Sarah's voice was steady, factual, the voice of someone who had prepared for this exact moment, even though she never expected it. "Would you like me to recite the statute number, or should we skip to the part where you let me save this foal's life?" For a moment, Clayton looked like he might physically remove her. His hands clenched into fists. His jaw worked silently. But then he saw the cameras. At least 6 phones were pointed at him now, recording every word, every movement. One wrong move, and this would be everywhere by noon. The town's Facebook groups, the local news, the animal rights forums that seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever someone mistreated a horse. He took a step back. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "You've got 1 hour. After that, you're trespassing." Sarah didn't waste time responding. She was already back beside the foal, her hands moving with urgent purpose. She pulled supplies from her truck bag: syringes, vials, alcohol wipes, emergency medications she carried for situations exactly like this. The foal's condition was deteriorating fast. Its breathing had become ragged, each inhale a visible struggle. The heart rate was climbing dangerously high, a sign that the body was fighting a losing battle. White muscle disease. It was a condition caused by selenium and vitamin E deficiency, most common in areas where the soil lacked these nutrients. Pregnant mares needed supplements to ensure healthy foal development. Without them, the foal's muscles, including the heart, developed improperly. The disease was preventable, treatable if caught early, but fatal if ignored. And this foal had been ignored since before it was born. Sarah administered an injection of selenium and vitamin E, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She followed it with a dose of anti-inflammatory medication and a gentle fluid therapy setup to combat dehydration. Every action was precise, practiced, the result of years of training and countless emergencies. But even as she worked, a part of her mind was calculating odds, running through worst-case scenarios, preparing for the possibility that she was already too late. The mare watched every movement. She had been separated to the corner of the stall by one of the workers, held back by a lead rope, but her eyes never left her baby. She pawed at the ground, restless, anxious, releasing soft whinnies that sounded almost like questions. "Will my baby live? Are you helping? Please don't stop." Sarah glanced up at the mare, and something in her chest tightened. This wasn't just about the foal anymore. It was about a mother who had done everything right, who had carried this baby for 11 months, who had given birth in a cold stall without proper care, and who now had to watch a stranger fight to save what should never have been in danger in the first place. One of the workers, a young woman with blonde hair tucked under a baseball cap, approached the stall quietly. "Is it going to make it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Sarah answered honestly. "The next few hours are critical. If we can stabilize the heart and get the muscles responding, there's a chance. But this foal should never have been in this condition." The worker nodded, guilt written across her face. "We didn't know. Clayton never lets us call vets unless it's an emergency he can't ignore. He says it's too expensive, that horses have survived for thousands of years without medical intervention." Sarah's hands paused for just a second. "How many foals has this ranch lost in the past year?" The worker looked away. Three. Sarah's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. 3 foals died, and no one reported it. We wanted to. Some of us did. But Clayton threatened to fire anyone who caused trouble. And in a town this small, getting blacklisted from the biggest ranch means you don't work anywhere. Sarah understood then. This wasn't just about one negligent owner. It was about a system that protected profit over welfare, that punished whistleblowers, that made people choose between their conscience and their livelihood. It was about fear and silence, and the way cruelty could thrive when good people felt powerless to stop it. But silence only worked when everyone stayed quiet. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. The worker hesitated. Emma, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out if anyone here has photos or records of the other foals that died. Medical records, if they exist. Anything that documents what happened." Emma's eyes widened. "Clayton will kill me. Clayton is going to have much bigger problems than you in about an hour." Sarah pulled out her phone again and dialed a number. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "County Animal Control, this is Officer Davis." "Mark, it's Sarah Chun. I need you at Meadowbrook Ranch immediately. I've got a critical neglect case, possibly multiple violations, and a foal that might not survive the morning." There was a pause. "Meadowbrook? That's Clayton Howell's place. I know exactly whose place it is." Another pause, longer this time. "Sarah, Clayton's got connections. The county commissioner, the sheriff, half the town council. If you're making accusations." "I'm not making accusations. I'm documenting facts. A newborn foal is dying from preventable disease because this ranch failed to provide basic prenatal care. I have witnesses. I have video. And if you don't get here in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to make sure everyone knows that animal control refused to respond." She hung up before he could answer. Clayton had been standing near the barn entrance, watching from a distance, pretending not to care. But Sarah saw the way his posture had changed when she made the call. The way his hand moved to his own phone. The way he turned slightly away, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end. He was calling his own reinforcements, his own protection, the network of favors and influence that had allowed him to operate this way for years. But this time, Sarah thought it wouldn't be enough. The foal made a sound then, a weak, trembling whinny that barely carried past the stall walls. It was the first sound the baby had made since Sarah arrived. It wasn't much. It didn't mean safety or recovery, but it meant the foal was still fighting, still alive, still worth saving. Sarah placed a hand on the small, fragile head. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Behind her, Emma was already moving through the crowd, quietly speaking to other workers, gathering the evidence that had been hidden for too long. The sun climbed higher. The morning air warmed, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of a siren began to grow louder. Copy. The animal control truck arrived at 7:32, followed by 2 county sheriff's vehicles that no one had called for. Officer Mark Davis stepped out first, a man in his mid-50s with the weathered look of someone who had spent his career navigating the impossible space between the law and small-town politics. Behind him came Deputy Angela Morrison, younger, sharper, carrying a camera and documentation kit that suggested she knew exactly why she was there. Clayton met them at the gate, his posture transformed from defensive ranch owner to friendly neighbor in the span of seconds. "Mark, good to see you. Though I'm not sure why Sarah felt the need to drag you out here for a routine birthing issue." Mark's expression was neutral, professional. Dr. Chun reported a foal in critical condition due to possible neglect. "I'm required to investigate any formal complaint." Neglect. Clayton laughed, but it sounded forced. That's a strong word for what amounts to natural causes. Foals die sometimes. It's tragic, but it's reality. "Then you won't mind if we take a look?" Deputy Morrison said, already moving past him toward the stall. Sarah was still kneeling beside the foal when they arrived. The baby's condition had stabilized slightly. The breathing was less labored, the heart rate had come down from the dangerous spike, but it still hadn't attempted to stand. The selenium and vitamin E injection would take hours to show real effect, if it showed effect at all. Right now, the foal existed in that terrible liminal space between life and death, where every minute was both a small victory and a countdown to potential failure. "How bad?" Mark asked quietly, crouching beside Sarah. "White muscle disease, severe stage. No prenatal supplements, no proper nutrition for the mare during pregnancy. This foal's muscle tissue is underdeveloped, including cardiac muscle. I've started emergency treatment, but the prognosis is uncertain." Deputy Morrison was already documenting everything with her camera. The foal's condition, the mare's visible signs of malnutrition, the empty feed buckets in the stall, the lack of fresh water, the absence of any veterinary supplies or care equipment. Each photo was a piece of evidence, a small indictment in a larger story. Dr. Chun mentioned there might be other incidents, Mark said. Sarah nodded toward Emma, who stood near the stall with a folder clutched against her chest. The young worker looked terrified, but she stepped forward anyway. "I found records," Emma said, her voice shaking. "In the office. Clayton keeps files on all the horses, including the ones that died. I made copies." Clayton's voice boomed across the space. "That's theft. You have no right to take those files." "Actually," Deputy Morrison said, not looking up from her camera, "if those files contain evidence of animal welfare violations, they're subject to seizure under investigative authority. But thank you for confirming they exist." Emma opened the folder. Inside were veterinary records, sparse and incomplete, alongside handwritten notes in Clayton's distinctive scrawl. 3 foals in the past 14 months. All died within hours or days of birth. All listed as natural causes or weak constitution. But the details, when read together, painted a different picture. 1 foal born underweight, legs unable to support body. No vet called. 2nd foal, respiratory distress. died before morning. No vet called. Third foal, severe muscle tremors, heart failure. Vet called 6 hours after birth. Too late. These are classic signs of nutritional deficiency, Sarah said, reading over the notes. Every single one of these deaths was preventable with proper prenatal care. Mark's jaw tightened. Clayton, how many pregnant mares are currently on this property? Clayton crossed his arms. I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question. A long silence. Then 4. And are they receiving selenium and vitamin E supplements? No answer. Deputy Morrison stood up from documenting the foal and walked over to Clayton. She was a full foot shorter than him, but somehow she made him look small. Mr. Howell, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I strongly suggest you answer honestly. Have you been deliberately withholding veterinary care and nutritional supplements from pregnant mares to cut costs? I run a business, not a charity. Horses cost money. I make decisions based on what's economically viable, even if those decisions result in the deaths of newborn foals. Clayton's face flushed. You're twisting this. I've been breeding horses for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. Then explain, Sarah interjected, standing up, why this ranch has a foal mortality rate that's 15 times higher than the regional average. She had done the math quickly, roughly, but the point landed. The workers around the stall shifted uncomfortably. A few looked genuinely shocked, as if they hadn't realized the scope of the problem because it had been normalized over time. Incident by incident, death by death. Mark pulled out his radio. I need a livestock trailer and a transport team at Meadowbrook Ranch. We're removing at minimum 1 foal and 1 mare for emergency medical care, possibly more depending on what we find. You can't do that, Clayton protested. Those are my horses, my property. Under animal welfare statutes, any animal deemed to be in immediate danger can be removed pending investigation. You want to challenge that, call your lawyer. But these horses are leaving. For the first time, Clayton looked genuinely worried. Not embarrassed or defensive, but actually afraid. Sarah recognized the shift. This wasn't about the foal anymore, at least not for him. This was about exposure, about the careful house of cards he'd built starting to collapse, about all the corners he'd cut, all the inspections he'd avoided, all the regulations he'd sidestepped with the help of well-placed friends, suddenly coming in a sharp, unforgiving light. Emma spoke again, softer now. There's something else you should know. Everyone turned to look at her. The mare, the one who just gave birth, her name is Duchess. She was bought from a rescue auction 8 months ago. She was already pregnant when Clayton got her. He paid almost nothing for her because she was in poor condition. He said he was going to rehabilitate her, get her healthy, give the foal a good start. But he didn't, Sarah finished. Emma shook her head. He kept her on minimal feed. No supplements. When some of us asked if we should call a vet to check on the pregnancy, he said he'd handle it. He never did. We should have pushed harder. We should have called someone ourselves. The guilt in her voice was palpable, the kind of regret that comes from knowing you had the power to prevent something terrible and chose inaction instead. Sarah had heard that tone before, in the voices of people who stayed silent during abuse, who looked away from suffering because confrontation felt too hard, too risky, too likely to cost them something they weren't willing to lose. But Emma was here now, speaking up now, and that had to count for something. Deputy Morrison added something to her notes. We'll need statements from anyone willing to provide them. What you saw, what you were told, what you were prevented from doing. 3 more workers stepped forward. The foal made another small sound, and suddenly all eyes were on it again. Sarah knelt down quickly, checking vitals. The heart rate was steadier, the breathing less strained. And then, for the first time since being born, the foal moved its head. Not much, just a slight lift, a small turn toward its mother's voice. But it was movement. It was response. It was the first real sign that the treatment might be working. Come on, baby, Sarah whispered. You're stronger than you know. The mare nickered, low and urgent. She pulled against the lead rope, desperate to reach her foal. One of the workers looked at Mark, silently asking permission. He nodded. The worker released the rope, and the mare moved immediately to her baby, pressing her muzzle against the small body, breathing warm air across the fragile head, making those soft maternal sounds that needed no translation in any species. The foal responded. Its ear twitched, its eye opened wider, and then, with an effort that seemed to require every ounce of strength in its tiny body, it tried to stand. It failed. The legs buckled. The body collapsed back into the dirt. But it had tried, and sometimes trying was where survival began. The transport trailer arrived at 8:45, a large white vehicle with padded interior sections and equipment designed for moving horses safely. By then, word had spread beyond the ranch. 3 cars from the local news station were parked along the road outside the property. A reporter Sarah recognized from the evening news stood near the entrance with a cameraman, filming everything. Social media had already caught fire. Someone had posted Emma's initial video of the collapsed foal. It had been shared 2,000 times in less than an hour. The comments section was a flood of outrage, demands for justice, calls to shut down the ranch permanently. Clayton stood near the barn, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in harsh whispers to whoever was on the other end. His body language had shifted from defensive to desperate. His carefully constructed authority was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it. Even his most loyal workers, the ones who had defended him out of habit or fear, now kept their distance. Sarah monitored the foal continuously. The second attempt to stand had failed, as had the third and fourth. But each attempt was stronger than the last. The legs held for a few seconds longer. The body showed more control. The determination was there, that pure animal instinct to rise, to walk, to join the world that waited beyond the stall walls. The foal just needed more time, more treatment, more of the nutrients that should have been flowing through its system since before birth. Mark stood with Deputy Morrison near the stall, reviewing the documentation they gathered. The evidence was overwhelming. Records of inadequate care, multiple preventable deaths, testimony from workers who had been threatened into silence, photos of current conditions that clearly violated state animal welfare standards. This wasn't going to be a warning or a fine. This was going to be criminal charges. How many horses total are on this property? Deputy Morrison asked. Emma, who had become their unofficial liaison, checked a clipboard. 32. 12 broodmares, 8 young horses in training, 6 breeding stallions, and 6 foals born this season besides this one. I want every pregnant mare examined by a licensed veterinarian within the next 4 hours, Mark said, and I want nutrition assessments on all of them. If we find similar deficiencies, we're removing the entire breeding program. Clayton's voice cut through the air. You can't shut me down based on one incident. 1. Deputy Morrison turned to face him. We have documented evidence of 4 foal deaths in 14 months, all from preventable causes. We have witness testimony of systematic denial of veterinary care. We have current animals showing signs of neglect. This isn't one incident, Mr. Howell. This is a pattern of abuse disguised as standard practice. A black sedan pulled up near the barn. A woman in a tailored suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. Clayton's lawyer had arrived. She spoke briefly with him, her expression neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Then she turned to Mark. My client will cooperate fully with your investigation, Officer Davis. However, I must insist that any removal of animals from this property be done with proper documentation and in accordance with due process. Already in progress, Mark replied, handing her a stack of papers. Seizure orders, veterinary assessment requirements, and notice of investigation. Everything's by the book. The lawyer scanned the documents quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. She whispered something to Clayton. His face went pale. Meanwhile, Sarah made a decision. The foal needed more intensive care than she could provide in a ranch stall. The emergency treatment had stabilized the immediate crisis, but full recovery would require controlled environment, continuous monitoring for nutrition, physical therapy to strengthen the underdeveloped muscles. The foal needed a hospital. Mark, I'm recommending immediate transport to the Equine Medical Center in Riverside, Sarah said. This foal needs 24-hour care. Mark nodded. Approved. We'll transport the mare with the foal to prevent additional stress. The loading process was delicate, complicated by the foal's inability to walk. Two veterinary technicians from the transport team carefully lifted the small body onto a padded stretcher, moving with practiced gentleness. The mare followed anxiously, her eyes never leaving her baby, her whole body tense with protective instinct. They were loaded into the trailer together, secured in a way that allowed them to see and smell each other, to maintain the bond that was perhaps the only thing keeping the foal fighting. As the trailer doors closed, one of the news reporters called out, "Dr. Chun, can you tell us what happened here?" Sarah paused. She could walk away, let the official channels handle the public communication. But she thought about the 3 foals that had died in silence, about the system that had protected neglect, about all the animals suffering in similar situations because no one spoke loud enough to be heard. She walked over to the camera. "What happened here is a failure," she said, her voice clear and steady. "A failure of care, a failure of oversight, and a failure of a community that saw warning signs and chose to look away. This foal is fighting for its life because profit was prioritized over welfare, because corners were cut to save money, because accountability was avoided through connections and intimidation. But here's what I want people to understand. This isn't an isolated incident. This happens on farms and ranches across the country every day. Animals suffer. Animals die. And the people responsible face minimal consequences because we treat animal cruelty as a minor infraction rather than the serious crime it is." She pointed back toward the ranch. 4 foals have died here in just over a year. 4 preventable deaths. And it took a random passerby stopping to check on a crowd for anyone to finally intervene. That's not acceptable. That should never be acceptable. "What do you want to see happen?" the reporter asked. "I want criminal charges. I want every animal on this property examined and removed if necessary. I want new regulations that require mandatory reporting of livestock deaths and regular inspections of breeding facilities. And I want people to understand that staying silent makes you complicit. If you see abuse, report it. If you work somewhere that prioritizes profit over animal welfare, speak up. Don't wait for someone else to be the hero. Don't assume someone in authority already knows and is handling it. Most of the time, no one knows because no one is willing to say it out loud." Behind her, Clayton's lawyer was trying to pull him toward his truck, but he jerked away from her grasp. "You've destroyed my reputation," he shouted at Sarah. "My business is done because of your meddling." Sarah turned to face him directly. "Your business should be done. You've been killing animals through neglect for years, and you've gotten away with it because people were afraid of you. But that ends today. I provided jobs. I contributed to this community. You contributed pain and death and normalized cruelty. The community will survive without you. The horses you've harmed won't survive unless we intervene." The transport trailer pulled away, carrying Duchess and her foal toward treatment, toward hope, toward the kind of care they should have received from the beginning. Sarah watched it disappear down the road, and she felt the adrenaline that had been holding her together start to fade. She was exhausted. Her hands were shaking, but she wasn't done yet. Deputy Morrison approached her. "We're going to need your full statement. Everything you observed, everything you treated, your professional assessment of the foal's condition and the contributing factors. I'll provide whatever you need. This is going to be a long process. Court case probably. Media attention. Clayton has friends in this county. They're going to fight back." Sarah looked at the stall where the foal had been lying just hours ago, where it had struggled to breathe, where it had existed in that terrible space between life and death because someone chose profit over compassion. She thought about the workers who had wanted to help but felt powerless. She thought about the 3 foals who never got a chance at all. "Let them fight," she said. "I'm not backing down." The sun was higher now, the morning heat building. More vehicles arrived. State agricultural inspectors, additional animal control officers, a team from the county health department. What had started as one woman stopping to check on a crowd had become a full-scale investigation, and there was no going back now. The silence had been broken. The truth was out. And whatever came next, at least the foal had a chance. 72 hours after the foal arrived at Riverside Equine Medical Center, it stood for the first time. Not a failed attempt or a brief struggle, but an actual, sustained stand. The legs trembled with effort, the muscles still weak from underdevelopment, but they held. They held for 30 seconds, then a minute, then 5. The veterinary staff gathered outside the recovery stall, watching in silence, some with tears in their eyes, because they knew how close this moment had come to never happening at all. Dr. Sarah Chun was there. She had barely left the facility since the transport, sleeping in the on-call room, monitoring the foal's progress through every small victory and setback. The selenium and vitamin E treatments had been supplemented with 4 nutrition, physical therapy sessions to encourage muscle development, and constant monitoring of the cardiac function. The foal's heart had been the biggest concern, the damaged muscle tissue that could fail at any moment. But it hadn't failed. Against statistics and reasonable expectations, the small heart kept beating, kept strengthening, kept proving that sometimes survival is a choice the body makes even when the odds suggest otherwise. Duchess stood beside her foal, finally calm after 3 days of anxious vigilance. The mare had been examined thoroughly and started on her own treatment plan, proper nutrition, supplements, care that should have been standard from the moment she arrived at Meadowbrook Ranch pregnant and vulnerable. Her body condition was improving. The dull coat was beginning to shine. The fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something that looked almost like trust. "We're calling her Phoenix," one of the technicians said, watching the foal take its first wobbly steps, "because she rose from ashes." Sarah nodded. It was a fitting name for a creature that shouldn't have survived, that existed now only because someone stopped to check on a crowd, because someone refused to accept that death was inevitable, because sometimes intervention matters more than convenience. The news had exploded in the days following the intervention. The video of the foal struggling to breathe had gone viral, accumulating millions of views across platforms. News outlets from 3 states picked up the story. Animal welfare organizations used it as a case study in advocacy and intervention. The comment sections overflowed with anger at Clayton, support for Sarah, and thousands of stories from people who had witnessed similar situations and regretted their silence. But the real impact was happening quietly in the background in the systems that had enabled the abuse. Clayton Howell was arrested on 16 counts of animal cruelty and neglect. The investigation expanded beyond the foals to include evidence of systematic mistreatment across his entire operation. 2 stallions were found with untreated injuries. 5 horses showed signs of chronic malnutrition. The breeding records revealed a pattern of cutting costs at every level, from feed quality to veterinary care to basic facility maintenance. His lawyer tried to argue that these were standard agricultural practices, that farms operated differently than suburban pet ownership, that expectations needed to be realistic. The judge disagreed. The trial lasted 6 days. Workers testified about being threatened if they called vets. Emma's documentation provided undeniable proof of the pattern of deaths. Sarah's expert testimony explained in clear, detailed terms exactly how each preventable death had occurred and what proper care would have looked like. The prosecution presented photos, videos, medical records, and witness statements that painted a comprehensive picture of negligence dressed up as business efficiency. Clayton was convicted on 14 of 16 counts. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in prison and a lifetime ban from owning, breeding, or working with horses in any capacity. His ranch was seized under asset forfeiture laws, with proceeds designated for animal welfare programs. The 31 horses remaining on the property were distributed to rescue organizations and experienced foster homes. Every single one received full veterinary examinations and treatment plans. But beyond Clayton's conviction, something larger shifted in the county. The case prompted a review of agricultural oversight regulations. Mandatory reporting requirements were enacted for livestock deaths. Unannounced inspections became standard for breeding operations. The county hired 2 additional animal control officers specifically focused on farm animal welfare. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't catch everything, but it was movement in the right direction. Sarah received hundreds of messages. Some praised her intervention. Some criticized her for destroying a man's livelihood. She read them all, understanding that controversial action always draws mixed reactions. that speaking up means accepting both support and backlash. What mattered wasn't universal approval. What mattered was that Phoenix was alive, walking, growing stronger every day. What mattered was that the other horses were getting care. What mattered was that future animals on future farms might suffer less because someone refused to stay silent. 6 weeks after the rescue, Phoenix was cleared for adoption. The medical center had strict protocols about placing horses with serious health histories. They needed homes with experience, resources, and commitment to ongoing treatment. Several applicants were rejected for insufficient preparation or unrealistic expectations. Then a woman named Margaret Sullivan arrived. She was in her late 60s, a retired large animal veterinarian who had spent 40 years treating farm animals. She had land, resources, experience with special needs horses, and a quiet, patient demeanor that suggested she understood exactly what she was taking on. She met Phoenix in the outdoor paddock, watched the foal walk, observed the lingering weakness in the gait, the careful way the legs moved, the permanent reminder of those crucial early hours when proper care was denied. "She'll never be a riding horse," the center director explained. "The muscle damage is permanent. She can live a full life with proper management, but she'll always have limitations." Margaret smiled. "I'm not looking for a riding horse. I'm looking for a reminder." A reminder of what? That surviving isn't the same as thriving, but it's where thriving starts. That intervention matters. That the smallest actions can save lives. She paused, looking at Phoenix with an expression Sarah recognized, the look of someone who had seen too much suffering and refused to accept it as inevitable. "I want to give her the life she should have had from the beginning." The adoption was approved. Sarah visited Margaret's farm 3 months later to check on Phoenix's progress. The foal, now nearly 5 months old, was grazing in a spacious pasture alongside Duchess and 2 other rescue horses. She moved carefully, deliberately, but she moved with purpose and without pain. The muscle weakness was still visible to a trained eye, but so was the strength, the resilience, the absolute determination to exist fully despite the damage that would mark her forever. Margaret walked Sarah out to the pasture fence. "She's doing well. Eats like a champion. Plays with the others. Has opinions about everything." She laughed softly. "Typical horse. Except for the history. The history is part of what makes her remarkable," Sarah said. "I heard Clayton appealed his sentence." "He did. It was denied. He's serving the full 2 years." Margaret nodded. "Good. Though I wish it were longer. The criminal case is over, but the civil cases are just beginning. Several animal welfare organizations are suing for damages. The workers who testified are pursuing wrongful termination claims. The county is being sued for inadequate oversight. This is going to reverberate for years." As it should. Margaret looked at Phoenix, at the foal who was now trotting toward them, curious and bold despite everything. "You know what I've learned in 40 years of veterinary work? That the animals who survive trauma often become the strongest advocates for change. Not because they can speak, but because their existence testifies to both the cruelty that's possible and the resilience that's necessary." Phoenix is going to live here, safe and cared for the rest of her life. And every single person who visits this farm is going to hear her story. They're going to learn what happens when care is denied and what happens when someone intervenes. That's her purpose now. That's her power. Sarah reached out to stroke Phoenix's nose as the foal approached the fence. The small creature leaned into her touch, unafraid, trusting in a way that seemed impossible for an animal who had started life surrounded by neglect. But maybe that was the point. Maybe trauma didn't have to define future relationships. Maybe survival could include healing, trust, connection, even after the worst possible beginning. "I got a call last week," Sarah said quietly, "from a woman who saw the news coverage. She works at a dairy farm 3 counties over. She said they have calves dying from preventable conditions, that management won't call vets, that workers are threatened if they report. She asked if I would come look, if I would intervene the way I did for Phoenix. Are you going?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about the personal cost of the past 3 months. The threats she'd received. The lawsuit Clayton's family had filed against her for defamation. though it would likely be dismissed. The way some people in town now avoided her, treating intervention as betrayal rather than duty. But she also thought about Phoenix, about the workers who had found their voices, about the changes that were slowly, imperfectly happening because someone had refused to accept that death was inevitable. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm going. Because if I don't, who will?" Margaret smiled, and in that smile was recognition, kinship, the unspoken understanding between people who choose to act even when action is difficult, even when consequences are uncertain, even when staying silent would be easier. Phoenix whinnied softly, a sound of contentment, of safety, of a life that almost wasn't but now was. The sun was setting, painting the pasture in gold and amber light. Somewhere in the distance, other horses grazed, other lives continued, other stories were still being written. And in a stall that morning months ago, when the crowd gathered and no one moved, when injustice seemed certain and suffering seemed inevitable, one woman had stopped her truck and made a different choice. The foal had refused to stand at sunrise, but by sunset she was walking, and that made all the difference.